My name is Zara Johnson-Martinez, and I'm writing this from my therapist's waiting room, where I've been coming twice a week for the past 6 months to process the psychological damage of spending 24 years never being enough for any racial community while simultaneously being too much for others. I'm biracial. My mother is African American and my father is Mexican American, but my mixed heritage has never felt like having the best of both worlds. Instead, it's felt like being trapped in racial limbo, where I'm constantly defending my right to exist in spaces that view my complex identity as either fraudulent, confusing, or threatening to their understanding of how race is supposed to work in America. The identity confusion began in childhood, but I didn't understand what was happening until I was old enough to recognize that other families didn't spend dinner conversations arguing about which racial boxes I should check on school forms. My mother, Keisha Johnson, wanted me to identify as Black because she believed that's how society would see me regardless of my mixed heritage, and she wanted me to be prepared for the racism that Black Americans face daily. My father, Carlos Martinez, wanted me to embrace my Latina identity because he was proud of his Mexican heritage and wanted me to maintain connections to our Spanish-speaking extended family and cultural traditions. The school forums became a monthly source of family conflict as teachers sent home paperwork requiring racial identification for demographic purposes, testing accommodations, and academic programs. My parents would debate which box I should check while I sat at the kitchen table feeling like my identity was something that required committee approval rather than personal understanding. When I suggested checking multiple boxes or writing in mixed, my parents would explain that the world wasn't ready for racial complexity and that I needed to choose sides to navigate American racial politics successfully. The playground politics at my elementary school reflected the broader confusion that my appearance created for people who expected racial identity to be obvious and uncomplicated. I was too dark to be fully accepted by white classmates, too light to be completely embraced by Black students, and too obviously non-Latina to fit seamlessly into the Hispanic social groups despite my father's heritage and my bilingual abilities. I became a racial chameleon who adjusted my behavior and cultural references depending on which group I was trying to connect with, never feeling authentic in any social setting. The family dynamics were equally complicated as extended relatives on both sides struggled to accept my complex identity and place me within their understanding of racial and cultural belonging. My maternal grandmother, who had lived through segregation and civil rights struggles, would make comments about how I was lucky to be light enough to pass in certain situations, language that made me feel like my appearance was some kind of racial advantage rather than a source of confusion and isolation. My paternal grandmother would speak to me in Spanish and express disappointment when I responded in English, viewing my incomplete language skills as evidence that I was rejecting my Mexican heritage in favor of American assimilation. The middle school years intensified the identity pressure as adolescent social dynamics became more rigid and exclusionary around racial and cultural belonging. Black classmates would question my authenticity when I couldn't relate to certain cultural references, or when my experiences differed from what they expected from someone claiming African American identity. Latino students would challenge my heritage when I couldn't dance salsa, didn't know regional Mexican music, or failed to demonstrate cultural knowledge that they considered essential for legitimate Latino identity. The "what are you?" question became a daily interrogation that followed me through hallways, cafeterias, and social situations where strangers felt entitled to solve the puzzle of my racial composition. People would guess my heritage based on my appearance, hair texture, facial features, and skin tone, treating my identity like a game show where the correct answer would somehow resolve their confusion about where I belonged in their racial categorization system. The question was never asked with genuine interest in knowing me as a person. It was asked to satisfy curiosity about my genetic composition and to determine which stereotypes and assumptions they should apply to our interaction. The dating complications added another layer of identity stress, as romantic relationships became opportunities for people to fetishize my mixed heritage or use me to fulfill fantasies about exotic beauty and cultural variety. Some boys were attracted to me specifically because I was mixed, viewing my racial ambiguity as exciting and different rather than seeing me as an individual with complex thoughts and feelings. Others would lose interest when they learned about my full heritage, apparently preferring the mystery of racial ambiguity to the reality of my Black and Mexican family backgrounds. The college application process forced another reckoning with racial categorization, as admissions forms required demographic information that would influence scholarship opportunities and diversity statistics. I spent hours researching whether checking multiple racial boxes would help or hurt my chances of admission, whether claiming mixed heritage would make me seem like I was trying to game the system, and which racial identity would provide the best strategic advantage for college acceptance and financial aid opportunities. The university experience at UCLA provided some relief as I encountered other mixed-race students who understood the complexity of navigating multiple racial identities in a society that preferred simple categorization. For the first time, I found people who shared experiences of family confusion, social rejection, and identity questioning that had characterized my entire childhood and adolescence. The Mixed Heritage Club became a crucial support system where I could discuss the psychological impact of racial limbo without having to defend my right to feel confused or frustrated about identity politics. But even within mixed-race communities, there were hierarchies and authenticity tests that replicated the exclusionary dynamics I had experienced in single-race groups. Some mixed students had grown up with more cultural knowledge about their various heritages. Others had different combinations of racial backgrounds that created different social experiences, and some have been raised with more acceptance and celebration of their mixed identity than others. The diversity within mixed-race experiences meant that even this community couldn't provide complete understanding or universal solutions to identity challenges. The professional world created new identity complications as workplace demographics and diversity initiatives required me to categorize myself for hiring statistics and inclusion programs. Some employers seemed to value my mixed heritage as evidence of their commitment to diversity, while others appeared confused about how to categorize my background for reporting purposes or organizational demographics. I became hyper-aware of how my racial ambiguity affected colleagues' perceptions of my competence, cultural fit, and potential for advancement in corporate environments. The imposter syndrome that developed around my racial identity extended into every aspect of my life, creating constant anxiety about whether I was Black enough for African American spaces, Latina enough for Hispanic communities, or American enough for mainstream professional environments. I found myself code-switching not just between languages and cultural behaviors, but between entire racial presentations depending on the social context and the acceptance I was seeking from different groups. The mental health crisis reached its peak during my senior year of college when the constant pressure of identity performance and community rejection created depression and anxiety that interfered with my academic performance and social relationships. I felt like I was living multiple lives that never integrated into a coherent sense of self, always performing racial authenticity for different audiences while never feeling genuinely accepted or understood by any community. The therapy that began during my crisis was with Dr. Maria Santos, a mixed-race psychologist who specialized in working with multiracial clients dealing with identity confusion and community rejection. She helped me understand that my struggles weren't personal failings, but predictable responses to living in a society that wasn't designed to accommodate racial complexity and that often penalized people who didn't fit into neat categorical boxes. Mixed-race identity is inherently challenging in a society that operates on racial binaries, Dr. Santos explained during one of our sessions. You're not confused about who you are, you're responding normally to a social system that's confused about how to handle your existence. The problem isn't your identity, it's other people's inability to accept racial complexity. The healing process involved developing a personal understanding of racial identity that wasn't dependent on external validation or community acceptance. I had to learn to define my racial and cultural belonging based on my own experiences and connections rather than other people's expectations or authenticity tests. This meant embracing aspects of both my Black and Mexican heritage while also acknowledging that my mixed experience was unique and valid regardless of how others perceived or categorized it. The community building that supported my healing included connecting with other mixed-race people through online forums, local meetup groups, and advocacy organizations that worked on multiracial issues and identity acceptance. These relationships provided validation that my experiences were common rather than unique, and that thriving as a mixed-race person required developing internal strength rather than seeking external approval from communities that might never fully accept racial complexity. The family conversations that emerged from therapy were difficult but necessary for addressing the mixed messages and identity pressure I had received throughout my childhood. My parents had to confront how their own racial anxieties and experiences had affected their approach to raising a mixed-race child, and we worked together to develop more supportive ways of discussing identity and belonging that honored my complex heritage without forcing me to choose sides. The professional empowerment that came from identity acceptance included pursuing work in diversity and inclusion consulting, where my mixed-race experience provided valuable perspective on the limitations of binary thinking about race and the importance of creating inclusive environments for people with complex identities. I developed training programs for organizations about multiracial inclusion and the unique challenges faced by employees who don't fit into traditional racial categories. The romantic relationship that developed during my healing process was with Jordan, another mixed-race person who understood the complexity of navigating multiple racial identities and family dynamics. Our relationship was based on mutual acceptance of each other's complex heritage rather than trying to simplify or categorize our racial backgrounds, and it provided a model for love that celebrated rather than resolved identity complexity. The advocacy work that emerged from my experience includes speaking at conferences about mixed-race identity and working with organizations that promote understanding and acceptance of multiracial people. I share my story to help other mixed-race individuals understand that they're not alone in their identity struggles and that thriving requires internal acceptance rather than external validation from communities that may not understand racial complexity. Today, I work as a diversity consultant while also pursuing a master's degree in ethnic studies with a focus on multiracial identity and community formation. I've learned to embrace my mixed heritage as a source of strength and complexity rather than confusion and isolation, understanding that my identity doesn't require other people's approval or understanding to be valid and valuable. The family relationships have evolved as my parents have learned to appreciate my mixed identity rather than viewing it as a problem to be solved through racial categorization. They've become advocates for multiracial acceptance in their own communities and have developed better understanding of how their childhood racial anxieties affected their approach to raising a mixed-race child. The self-acceptance journey has been long and difficult, but it has resulted in genuine comfort with my complex identity and resistance to other people's attempts to simplify or categorize my racial background. I now respond to "What are you?" questions with confidence rather than anxiety, explaining that I'm mixed race and that my identity doesn't require their understanding or approval to be legitimate and meaningful. Key resources and solutions that made the difference. Mixed-race support organizations like the Multiracial Americans of Southern California, MASC, provide community, advocacy, and resources for people dealing with identity confusion and community rejection. Therapy with culturally competent providers who understand multiracial identity helps individuals process family dynamics and develop healthy self-concept despite community pressure and identity confusion. Educational resources about mixed-race history and identity development help people understand that their experiences are part of a broader pattern rather than individual problems or failings. Campus and community groups for multiracial people provide peer support and shared strategies for navigating identity challenges in various social and professional contexts. Advocacy organizations work on policy changes and cultural shifts that recognize and accommodate multiracial identity in demographic collection, diversity programs, and social services. Family therapy services help relatives understand the impact of racial anxiety and identity pressure on mixed-race children and develop more supportive approaches to heritage and belonging. Professional development programs focus on multiracial inclusion in workplace diversity initiatives and help organizations understand the unique challenges faced by mixed-race employees. Mental health resources specifically addressing multiracial identity provide support for the psychological impact of racial limbo and community rejection that many mixed-race people experience. Today, when I meet other mixed-race people who are struggling with identity confusion or community rejection, I tell them that their complex heritage is a strength rather than a problem, and that their identity doesn't require other people's understanding or approval to be valid. The communities that reject you because of your racial complexity are revealing their own limitations rather than identifying any deficiency in your identity. You belong wherever you choose to belong, and your mixed heritage gives you unique perspective and resilience that monoracial people may not understand but definitely can't diminish.